Imagine thinking you rule the entire galaxy, only to stumble upon a locked door in the middle of deep space. That's exactly what happened to Admiral Czar, and what he found on the other side would change everything. If you've ever rooted for the underdog, you're going to want to see how this plays out. Czar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring into a black void that his sensors told him was anything but empty. Dozens of strange metal buoys were just floating out there, all chirping the exact same message. "Sir, we're getting transmissions from those beacons," Lieutenant Vex, his young Alarian communications officer, reported. Her silver eyes, usually so calm, reflected the nervous blinking of the bridge lights. The message is repeating in 17 different languages. "Put it on screen," Czar commanded, his voice a low rumble. As a Kthron warrior, his entire life and his people's for over 1,000 years had been dedicated to expanding the Galactic Empire's reach. He lived for moments like this. The ship's computer crunched the data, and in seconds, a stark message flashed on every monitor. "Forbidden Terran quarantine zone. Entry prohibited by Galactic Treaty 2387X. Violators will face an immediate response." A deep frown creased Zier's face. In his 40 years of decorated service, he'd never once heard of this treaty. The Empire's records were flawless, documenting every pact, every conquered planet, every species they'd ever met. And yet, here was a claim of authority over a massive chunk of space. By his quick calculation, it covered nearly 50 star systems. "Computer," he barked, "search the Imperial Archives for Galactic Treaty 2387X. The computer's voice was flat and emotionless. "Searching. No records found." "Fine. Search for any mention of a Terran quarantine zone." "Searching. No records found." This was just not possible. The Empire had dominated this galaxy for 3,000 years, swallowing hundreds of worlds and civilizations. How could a treaty of this magnitude simply not exist in their records? "Dr. Yellen, get to the bridge, now," Zaktar ordered over the comms. As the fleet's top xenobiologist, Dr. Yellen knew more about alien cultures than anyone. If there was an answer, she would find it. She glided onto the bridge minutes later, her delicate tentacles twisting nervously as she read the message. "Admiral, this is highly unusual," she said, her voice soft and melodic. Her species, the Zalani, were renowned for their brilliant analytical minds. "The word Terran doesn't appear in any of our standard galactic language databases." "So what is it?" Czar pressed. "I cross-referenced it with our archives of dead languages," Dr. Yelan explained, her tentacles fluttering with excitement. "Terran seems to come from an ancient word used by a species called humans, Terra. In their primitive tongue, it meant Earth." Zektor's eyes shot wide. "Humans? But they wiped themselves out centuries ago." "According to our official records, yes," Dr. Yolen confirmed. "A minor, hot-headed species that barely figured out light-speed travel before blasting their own homeworld to dust in a civil war. There shouldn't be a single trace of them left." The Admiral stepped toward the main view screen, his gaze fixed on the ancient markers. They looked ancient, weathered by millennia. The strange symbols etched into their hulls were faded, but the beacons themselves were humming with power, endlessly broadcasting their warning. "What's your estimate on their age?" he asked. Dr. Yolen checked her scanner. "Based on the metal decay, they've been out here for at least 2,000 years, Admiral. Maybe even longer." She paused. "But sir, that's impossible." "Why?" "Because our records state that humans only achieved spaceflight around 800 years ago," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They couldn't have built these before they even knew how to leave their own planet." A cold knot formed in Czar's stomach. Something was fundamentally wrong. Either the Empire's history books had a massive hole in them, or someone had gone to great lengths to scrub this entire region of space from the record. "Lieutenant Vex, send a priority message to Imperial Command," he ordered. "Inform them we've found an undocumented quarantine zone with no corresponding treaty in the archives. We need clarification immediately." "Yes, sir," Vex replied, her fingers flying across her console. As they waited, Zaktar turned to the tactical display. The beacons formed a perfect, impenetrable-looking perimeter around the 50 star systems. But beyond that perimeter, his long-range sensors were picking up something even stranger. "Sir," Ensign Torres called out from the sensor station, "I'm detecting artificial structures inside several of those systems." "What kind of structures?" "They're huge, sir. Massive orbital stations, maybe even shipyards. But they're completely dark. No energy signatures at all. It's like they're all asleep." Zaktar strode over to the sensor station to see for himself. The structures were colossal, some dwarfing even the largest Imperial stations. They hung in perfect, silent formation around dead planets, like sleeping giants just waiting for an alarm clock to go off. "Any life signs?" he asked. "Nothing, sir. No power, no communications, not a whisper of movement. But there's no doubt they were built by someone." A soft chime announced the reply from Imperial Command. Lieutenant Vex looked up from her console, her expression puzzled. "Sir, Command reports they have no knowledge of any quarantine zone in this sector. Their orders are to proceed with our investigation and report back on what we find." Zaktar gave a slow, deliberate nod. The Empire hated loose ends, especially ones that hinted at unknown threats or powerful technologies. His orders were simple: find out what was behind that wall of beacons and claim it for the Empire. But a warning bell was ringing in his head. The message wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Violators will face an immediate response. A response from who? From what? "Dr. Yellen, tell me more about these humans," he asked. The xenobiologist pulled up her data. "They were a young species, Admiral, only exploring the stars for a few hundred years before they vanished. Their most notable trait was their incredible adaptability. They could thrive in almost any environment and master new technologies at a shocking speed." "Were they a threat?" "Any species can be a threat, sir," Dr. Yellen answered cautiously, "but humans were known for their intensity. They formed powerful loyalties, but they could be terrifyingly violent when pushed. Their final civil war was said to be one of the most brutal conflicts the galaxy had ever seen." Zaktar looked back at the beacons. If a species that destructive had put up a wall, were they trying to keep others out, or was it to keep something else in? "Admiral," Lieutenant Vex's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're getting another transmission, not from Command. It's coming from one of the beacons." It was different this time. "Put it through." The message was short, cold, and to the point. "Imperial vessel, you have remained at this border for 4.7 hours. Declare your intentions or depart immediately." The bridge went dead silent. These weren't just automated recordings. Something was watching them in real time. "Sir," Ensign Torres whispered, his voice tight. "The beacon that sent that message, it just hit us with a scan. It's reading our ship's full specifications." The Kthron warrior and Tsar took over. Being watched was one thing. Being analyzed was a prelude to a fight. "All ships, yellow alert," he commanded. "Raise shields, power up weapons, but do not, I repeat, do not fire on those beacons without my direct order." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency. Soft yellow lights washed over the consoles as the fleet braced for a fight. "Admiral," Dr. Yolande said, her voice barely a whisper, Perhaps we should pull back and report what we found. First contact protocols are very clear about the Empire does not retreat from a mystery, Doctor. Tsar cut her off. We solve it. But even as the words left his mouth, a seed of doubt was sprouting. These ancient beacons were using technology advanced enough to X-ray his flagship from halfway across the system. The silent, colossal structures on the other side hinted at a civilization with unimaginable power. And the fact that these extinct humans were completely erased from Imperial history meant one of two things. They were masters of hiding, or someone else had tried to bury them for a very good reason. "Sir," Torres yelled, his voice cracking, "I've got movement. Beyond the barrier, those dormant structures are powering up." The main screen switched to a long-range sensor feed. Across 3 different star systems, the sleeping giants were waking up. Lights blinked on across their dark hulls, and energy signatures began to spike off the charts. "So they know we're here," Zaktar said, his voice grim. "Admiral," Vex reported, "Command just sent another message. They're doubling down. They want us to proceed and get a full report on any technology we find." Tsar glanced at his crew. They were the best in the fleet, fiercely loyal and utterly confident. His armada of 12 heavy cruisers and 40 support ships could crush almost any opponent. But the warning on those beacons and the impossible sight of a dead civilization waking from its grave told him they were about to face something far beyond their experience. "Sir," Dr. Yelin tried one last time, "the beacons mentioned a treaty. What if the builders believe they have an agreement with the Empire?" Zakar's jaw tightened. "If they do, then we deal with the fallout," he said firmly. "The Empire does not honor treaties it knows nothing about." He turned to his navigation officer. "What happens when an unstoppable empire runs into an immovable secret? Imagine being told to turn back over and over by ancient warnings in 100 different languages." Well, Admiral Tsar of the Galactic Empire didn't care. He had his orders, and a whole lot of pride. "So, what do you think they found? Stick with me to see this arrogant admiral get the surprise of his life." As his fleet pushed past the warning beacons, they screamed their last message, "Violation forbidden." Then the first ship crossed the line, and everything went silent. But in the darkness ahead, something massive began to wake up. The first thing that hit Admiral Tsar was the quiet. As his fleet slipped into the forbidden zone, all the alarms just stopped. The ancient beacons that had been shouting warnings for centuries finally went dark. But this wasn't a peaceful silence. It felt heavy, like the air right before a lightning strike. "Status report," Tsar ordered, trying to shrug off a sudden chill. "All ships are across the perimeter, sir," Lieutenant Vex reported. "No hostile action. The beacons seem to have powered down." But then another voice cut in. "Sir," called Ensign Torres from the sensor station, "I'm reading something weird. The space around us is different." "Explain," Tsar snapped. Torres just stared at his console, completely baffled. "The electromagnetic readings are all wrong, sir," Torres said. "It's like this whole area is being watched by some kind of invisible network. I can't find the source, but I know we're being scanned." Dr. Yolin rushed over to another scanner and her eyes went wide. "Admiral, he's right. I'm picking up tiny energy signatures everywhere. They're faint, but they're all around us. It's as if space itself has been engineered." Tsar stared at the main view screen. The star system ahead had 7 planets. 3 of them looked like they might have had life once, but now they were just cold, dead rocks. But circling each of those dead planets were the enormous structures his sensors had picked up earlier. "Take us to the nearest one," he commanded. "Full sensor sweep. I want to know exactly what we're up against." As the fleet got closer, the sheer size of the thing became staggering. It was a space station bigger than anything the Empire had ever recorded, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shimmer and twist, almost hurting your eyes to look at. It was clearly man-made, but it didn't follow any rules of architecture Zar had ever seen. "Sir," Torres shouted, "the station has power. It's in some kind of low-power standby mode, but it's definitely active." "Any life signs?" Zar asked. "Negative." "But Admiral," Torres added, "it has docking bays big enough for a ship twice the size of our flagship." Dr. Yolen looked up from her analysis, looking pale. "Admiral, the materials used to build this, they contain elements that aren't on our periodic table. Whoever built this had technology we can't even begin to comprehend." That was all Zar needed to hear. "Prepare a boarding party," he ordered. "Full combat gear. We're going in." "Sir," Dr. Yolan protested, "first contact protocols require—" "Doctor," Zar cut her off, "according to our files, whoever built this has been extinct for centuries. This is a salvage mission, not first contact." But even as he said it, a sliver of doubt crept in. The station looked brand new, with no signs of damage from meteors or time. It was like it was built yesterday and then simply put to sleep. The boarding party was made up of 12 Imperial Marines, Dr. Yolen, and a couple of tech specialists. They flew toward the station in a heavily armored shuttle, following the book on how to investigate a mystery ship. "Sir," the shuttle pilot's voice crackled over the comms, "one of the docking bays is opening. It's guiding us in." "Guiding you with what?" Zar demanded. "Unknown, sir, but the bay is filling with air and putting up a containment field. It's like someone is rolling out the welcome mat for us." The shuttle landed so smoothly they barely felt it. Looking out the windows, the boarding party saw a docking bay so enormous it could have held 50 of their ships. And more importantly, it was lit. Soft blue lights glowed from the walls, making the whole place feel calm. "Atmosphere is breathable," reported Corporal Voss, the squad leader. "Gravity is standard. Temperature is perfect." It seemed whoever built this place wanted their visitors to be comfortable. The party stepped out of the shuttle, weapons raised, but the massive bay was completely empty. All they could see were huge doorways leading deeper into the station. The walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when you tried to focus on them. "Dr. Yolan," Zar's voice came through their helmets. "Can you make any sense of this?" "I'm analyzing them now, Admiral," she replied, her voice filled with awe. "They seem to be— Wait a minute, these aren't just decorations. It's some kind of advanced display. I think it's trying to talk to us." As she spoke, the symbols began to glow. They swirled and rearranged themselves, becoming simpler. After a few minutes, they morphed into shapes that looked remarkably like the Empire's own written language. "Incredible," Dr. Yolan whispered. "The system is learning our language just by listening to our comms." Suddenly, the shifting symbols locked into place, forming perfect, clear text. "Welcome to Sanctuary Station Alpha 7. Please proceed to the central chamber for orientation." The Marines snapped their rifles up, but Zar's voice calmed them. "Hold your fire. Something is communicating. Stay sharp, but let's see what it wants." They walked deeper into the station, following lighted paths down corridors so wide that trucks could have driven through them. The whole place felt beautiful and alive, with clean lines and a strange organic feel. They didn't see a single living soul, but the station knew they were there. Doors slid open for them, lights brightened to show the way, and the air stayed perfectly comfortable. It felt like being welcomed into a grand home by an invisible host. They finally reached the central chamber, a massive sphere with walkways crisscrossing at different levels. In the very center, a platform began to hum. A soft light gathered above it, slowly taking the shape of a human woman. She looked to be middle-aged, with short gray hair and a simple uniform. When the hologram solidified, she looked right at Admiral Czar and smiled. "Admiral," she said, her voice perfect, "I am Warden Sarah Chen, guardian of the Terran Preserve. You have violated the Sanctuary Accord by entering this space. Please state the reason for your intrusion." Czar puffed out his chest. "I am Admiral Zaktar of the Galactic Empire. This territory has no legal standing. We are here to claim these systems for the Empire." The hologram's smile faded into sadness. "I see. How much time has passed since the accord was signed?" "I don't know anything about an accord," Zaktar shot back. "There are no treaties concerning this region." "Of course there aren't," Sarah Chen said softly. "That was part of the deal. We agreed to vanish from galactic history completely. All records of humanity were to be sealed or destroyed," she continued. "The galaxy would forget we ever existed, and in return we would never meddle in its affairs again." "But that's impossible," Dr. Yulan interrupted. "Humanity died out centuries ago." "Your records show what we wanted them to show," the warden said gently. "Humanity didn't go extinct, Doctor. We chose exile. We had to remove ourselves because we saw what we were becoming." "And what was that?" Czar demanded. The hologram paused. "We were too good at war, Admiral. Too clever, too ruthless. Every species we met either bent the knee to us or was wiped out by us. We were turning into the exact monster we'd always fought against," she explained. "A conquering empire, just like yours." "The Galactic Empire brings order," Zaktar snapped. "Yes," Sarah Chen agreed sadly. "And we saw where that path ends. We had a choice: rule the galaxy through force, or disappear and let everyone else grow in peace. We chose exile." Dr. Yolan stepped forward, her curiosity overriding her fear. "But this technology, these stations, how many of you are there?" "Enough," the warden answered simply. "We spent our first 100 years of exile building this home. We spent the next 100 years advancing our science." She paused, her holographic eyes filled with a deep sorrow. "And we spent the 3rd century preparing for today." "What day?" Zaktar demanded. "The day someone like you would finally ignore our warnings and force our hand. You see, you haven't just discovered a lost colony, Admiral. You've stumbled upon the quiet retirement of a sleeping giant. And now we have to decide what to do with a man who insists on poking giants with a stick." The warden looked at him, not with anger, but with pity. "We now must decide what to do with you. You've seen that we exist. That knowledge alone could bring the very wars we sacrificed everything to avoid." Imagine being the most decorated admiral in the entire Imperial fleet, only to find yourself cornered by a ghost. That was Admiral Zaktar's reality as the lights inside the mysterious space station pulsed around him. He could see hundreds, maybe thousands of identical structures blinking to life across the star system, waking from a centuries-long slumber. The station's warden, a human woman named Sarah Chen, looked at him with an unnerving calm. "Admiral, let's be perfectly clear," she said, her voice echoing not just in the chamber, but you get the feeling, across entire worlds. "Every human out here is watching this. They're waiting to see what you do next, and frankly, they're divided. Some think we should let you go and pretend this never happened. Others, well, they see you as a loose end that needs to be tied up." It was a threat wrapped in a calm warning, and it put Zaktar on a knife's edge. What would you do in his shoes? Let me know in the comments below, and stick around to see how he handles it. "Is that a threat?" Zaktar shot back, his warrior instincts kicking in. "No," Sarah replied smoothly. "It's an explanation. You've just stumbled into our backyard, Admiral, and it's a lot bigger than you think." She explained that the human race he'd learned about in history books, the one that supposedly wiped itself out, had actually spent the last 300 years becoming something new. "We're not the same people who tore our civilization apart," she said. "We're different." Dr. Yellen, Zactor's science officer, couldn't contain his curiosity. "Different how?" The warden offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're the guardians of our own exile, the watchdogs making sure humanity never again poisons the galaxy with its wars. And when someone comes knocking on our door, we're the ones who answer." As she spoke, the station's lights pulsed faster, and outside, Zactor saw impossible shapes gliding between the stars, ships so sleek and deadly they looked more like hunting animals than machines. "You have a choice, Admiral," the warden said plainly. "You can take your fleet, go home, and tell your emperor that this quarantine zone is full of old automated defenses that are just too dangerous to mess with. Your report will get buried, your crew will get new assignments, and this whole day will become a forgotten memory." Zactar's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" The holographic image of the warden flickered for a moment, as if she were listening to 1,000 whispered opinions at once. "Then we'll do what we've always done when our peace is threatened. We will remove the threat." A heavy silence filled the room. Zactar glanced at his team, Marines who had never tasted defeat, brilliant scientists hungry for discovery, and officers whose loyalty to the Empire was absolute. They were all looking to him, their lives and honors resting on his next words. "I need to speak with my command," he finally said, buying himself time. "Of course," the warden nodded. "But understand this, Admiral. You're the first outsider to set foot in Terran space in over 300 years. What happens next doesn't just decide your fate. It decides the fate of your entire empire. Choose wisely." Back on his flagship, Zactor's mind was a whirlwind. The warden's words haunted him as he stared at the colossal human station that made his fleet look like a collection of toys. Humans weren't extinct. They had chosen to hide, to vanish from the galactic stage. But why? And what in the stars had they become in all that time? A soft chime broke his train of thought. "Admiral," Lieutenant Vex's voice crackled over the comm, "Priority 1 message from Imperial Command." Zactor pulled his uniform straight and marched to the bridge. The main view screen lit up with the severe face of Grand Admiral Thexura, one of the Emperor's most feared and respected commanders. Her species, the Vorthon, were legendary for their cold, tactical genius. "Admiral Zactar," she began, skipping all pleasantries, "your report has created quite a stir. A hidden civilization with unknown technology. The Emperor is intrigued." "Yes, ma'am," Zactor answered, choosing his words with care. "Your new orders are to secure that technology for the Empire at any cost. A full battle fleet is on its way to you now. 10,000 ships led by Emperor Thaxian himself." The number hit Zactor like a physical blow. 10,000 ships. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was an invasion. Any chance of a peaceful resolution had just vanished. "Ma'am, with respect," he tried, "the people here seem to want a peaceful resolution. They mentioned some kind of old agreement." "Admiral," Thexura cut him off, her voice like ice. "The Empire doesn't recognize ancient agreements made without its seal of approval. You will hold your position and await the fleet. That is a direct order from your Emperor." The transmission cut out, leaving Zactar in a chilling silence. He looked at his crew, their faces beaming with pride and ambition, ready for another glorious conquest for the Empire. They trusted him completely. But for the first time in his career, Zactor felt like he was leading them off a cliff. These humans hadn't fired a single shot when they easily could have. They had tried to talk. That wasn't how enemies behaved. "Sir!" a voice called out. It was Torres at the sensor station. I'm picking up massive movement across the system. On the main screen, the tactical map came alive. Dozens of those dormant structures were shifting, gliding into perfect defensive patterns. The elegant space stations were now being flanked by colossal industrial platforms and what were unmistakably warships. "Dr. Hyland, analysis," Zactor barked. The scientist stared at the display, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. "Admiral, this is incredible. They're not just moving, they're creating a flawless three-dimensional defensive web. Every station provides overlapping fire for 3 others. It's perfect." "How long would it take our fleet to get into a formation like that?" Zactor asked. "Months, maybe years," Hyland admitted. "They just did it in under an hour. It's like they're all connected, controlled by a single mind." Just then, Lieutenant Vex spoke up. "Sir, we're getting another transmission from the station." "On screen," Zactor ordered. The warden appeared again, her face grim. "Admiral, our long-range sensors see a massive military force gathering in your home territory. It seems your Emperor has chosen war." "The Empire only makes war on those who defy it," Zactor replied, but the words felt hollow even to him. "I see," the warden said, a deep sadness in her voice. "Admiral, I need you to understand," she continued. "Humanity spent 300 years in exile. We weren't just hiding. We were preparing for a day we prayed would never come." "Preparing how?" Zactor demanded. Instead of answering, the screen behind her split into multiple windows, revealing secrets that made the bridge crew gasp. They saw immense shipyards hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids, factories powered by the cores of dead planets, and weapon platforms perfectly disguised as cosmic dust. "We didn't waste our time, Admiral. We advanced, we innovated, we got very, very good at ensuring our own survival." Dr. Yolen stared breathless. "Admiral, look at the scale! That shipyard alone could build ships bigger than our capital-class dreadnoughts." "We built more than just ships," the warden's voice cut in. "We built a new society, united in a single goal, to make sure humanity could never again threaten the peace of the galaxy." "By hiding away like cowards?" Zactor challenged. The warden's expression hardened into steel. "By becoming something the galaxy has never seen, a species that learned to control its own power instead of letting it consume them. But don't you dare mistake our restraint for weakness." The view screen shifted, showing the edge of the system where one of Zactor's patrol ships was stationed. A small, impossibly sleek ship appeared out of nowhere, moving with a grace that defied physics. It was nothing like the bulky, brutish warships of the Empire. As everyone watched, it approached the Imperial cruiser. "Attention, Imperial vessel," a calm female voice broadcasted. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Corps. You are ordered to leave this system now. This is your only warning." The Imperial captain, brimming with arrogance, responded by locking his weapons onto the tiny ship. "Unknown vessel, you are outmatched and outgunned. Surrender or be obliterated." What happened next left the entire bridge crew speechless. The little human ship didn't even try to dodge. As the Imperial cruiser's energy blasts hit it, its hull simply glowed, absorbing the entire attack before firing it back in a single, concentrated beam. The cruiser's shield shattered instantly, its weapons sparking and dying. How is that possible?" Torres stammered. The human ship sent one last message. "You have seen what our defenses can do. Leave now, or we will be forced to escalate." But the Imperial captain, too proud or too foolish to stand down, fired his remaining weapons. This time, the human ship didn't fire back. It simply emitted a soft pulse of light. In an instant, the Imperial cruiser went dark, its engines dead, adrift and helpless in the silent void. They hadn't destroyed it. They had surgically disabled it, a show of power so precise and controlled it was far more terrifying than any explosion could ever be. The bridge of the Imperial cruiser was a symphony of chaos. Red alert strobes painted the panicked faces of the crew as their ship tumbled helplessly through the void. They were dead in the water, but somehow they were still alive. "Admiral," a calm voice echoed from the main view screen, belonging to the warden of the mysterious human vessel. "Our ship could have vaporized your patrol craft in under a second. We chose to disable it instead. I hope that tells you something about our intentions." Admiral Sector stared at the tactical display. The human ship wasn't pressing its advantage. In fact, a smaller rescue vessel was already detaching from it, heading for his crippled cruiser. They were offering help. You're not behaving like an enemy," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "That's because we aren't your enemy, Admiral," the warden replied. "We're trying to stop a tragedy. When your Emperor arrives with his armada, he's going to be expecting a fight with a typical backwater species. But we are anything but typical. We've had 3 centuries, Admiral. 300 years since we left the galactic stage. It's a lot of time to get good at things other races can only theorize about." "What kind of things?" Sector asked, a knot tightening in his stomach. "Everything," the warden said simply. "Weapons that can hijack your own ship's systems and turn them on you. Defenses that make us practically invincible. Factories that can churn out a new fleet faster than you can scratch the paint on our old one. But more than anything, we've perfected the very concept of war." Dr. Yolen, his chief science officer, leaned closer to the screen. "What does that even mean?" "It means we studied it all," the warden explained. "Every skirmish in human history, every major battle ever fought by every known species. We analyzed every victory, and we learned even more from every defeat. We became the ultimate students of conflict, not because we crave conquest, but because we knew, one day, we'd have to defend our home." The view screen shifted, showing them images that made Sector's blood run cold. Human soldiers training in holographic environments that perfectly mimicked dozens of alien worlds. Scientists pioneering new technologies at a dizzying speed. And colossal supercomputers processing tactical data from thousands of different civilizations. "You built an entire society dedicated to warfare?" Sector asked, a strange mix of horror and awe in his voice. "We built an entire society dedicated to survival," the warden corrected him gently. "There's a crucial difference. We don't want your worlds. We don't want to rule your people. We just want to be left in peace. But if you force our hand, you'll find we are very, very good at fighting." Just then, the space around them began to change. More human ships started to appear. Not a dozen, not 100, but thousands upon thousands. They shimmered into existence out of asteroid fields, decloaked from hidden orbital stations, and simply materialized out of what had been empty space moments before. Where did they all come from?" Lieutenant Torres whispered in shock. "They were here the whole time," the warden explained. "Watching, waiting. We've had 3 centuries to perfect our stealth technology. Most of our fleet has been tracking your movements since the moment you crossed into our territory." In that instant, Sector understood. This wasn't some forgotten colony. This was a sleeping giant. This was an entire civilization that had spent 300 years preparing for this exact day. "Admiral," Lieutenant Vex shouted from his station, "long-range sensors are picking up the Imperial reinforcement fleet. They'll be in system in approximately 18 hours. The warden on the screen nodded, a sad look in his eyes. "We know. Our deep space listening posts picked up their launch signatures 6 hours ago. 10,000 ships led by the Emperor's personal flagship. He's coming to conquer us." "The Empire has never known defeat," Sector stated, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "The Empire has never fought humanity at its full strength," the warden countered. "Admiral, I'm giving you one last chance. Take your ships and go home. Tell your Emperor you found a system guarded by automated defenses too dangerous to breach. He'll classify the report, and this will all be forgotten. No one has to die today." Sector looked at the faces of his crew, all watching him, waiting. He thought about the crippled cruiser, the thousands of ghost ships, and the 3 centuries of silent, deadly preparation. But then he thought of his oath, his duty, and the direct orders from his Emperor. "I can't," he said, his voice heavy. "My orders are to hold this position." The warden's expression softened into something like pity. "I'm sorry to hear that, Admiral. You've seen what we can do to a single ship. When your Emperor arrives, he's about to find out what we can do to an entire fleet." The transmission cut out, leaving Sector in the silent, humming bridge of his ship. Around him, his crew began preparing for the inevitable battle. But a chilling thought crept into his mind. They weren't just preparing for a battle. They might be preparing for their own annihilation. The Imperial reinforcement fleet tore through hyperspace, arriving like a tidal wave of steel and fury. 10,000 warships glittered in the light of the distant star. Leading them was the Emperor's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, a dreadnought so massive it could shatter entire planets. From his bridge, Admiral Sector watched them arrive with a mix of relief and terror. Relief that he was no longer alone, and terror that even this overwhelming force might not be enough. "Sir," Lieutenant Vex reported, "we're getting a hail from the Emperor's ship." On screen, the imposing figure of Emperor Thaxian filled the view screen. He was a draconian, tall and powerful, with scales that shone like polished obsidian. His yellow eyes blazed with the absolute certainty of a ruler who had never lost. "Admiral Sector," the Emperor's voice boomed. "Report." "Your Majesty," Sector began, choosing his words carefully. "We've made contact with a previously uncharted human civilization. They claim this system as their sovereign territory under an ancient treaty, and their technology is far beyond anything we currently possess." "Humans?" The Emperor actually looked surprised. "Our archives say that species went extinct hundreds of years ago." "That information appears to be out of date, Your Majesty. They say they chose self-imposed exile, and they've spent the last 3 centuries focused entirely on technological development and military defense." Emperor Thaxian glanced at the tactical displays showing the human ships. "How many are we up against?" "We can't be certain, sir. Their stealth tech is unlike anything I've ever seen. We've counted several thousand, but there could be far more." "Several thousand against 10,000 of my finest ships?" The Emperor let out a dry, grating laugh. "Admiral, you've been spooked by phantoms. We will brush these humans aside." But as Thaxian scoffed, his own tactical officers were growing pale as they analyzed the data pouring in. The human fleet moved with a fluid, flawless coordination that seemed almost alive, and their energy readings were completely off the charts. "Your Majesty," one of the officers interrupted, his voice trembling slightly. "The enemy ships, they're emitting energy signatures we've never encountered before. Their defensive shielding is abnormal." "Abnormal in what way?" the Emperor snapped. "It seems to absorb and then redirect energy, sir. When Admiral Sector's cruiser fired on one of their ships, our own weapon energy was fired back at us, only amplified." Thaxian's confidence flickered for just a moment. "New tricks can always be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Prepare the fleet to attack." But before the order could be given, a new contact blinked onto the screen. It was a single small ship, breaking from the human formation and heading directly for them, broadcasting a universal request to parley. "Your Majesty," the communications officer announced, "they're asking for permission to dock. They say they have an ambassador who wishes to speak with you." Emperor Thaxian paused. This was a familiar tactic. Many foes had begged for terms when staring down the barrel of his invincible fleet. It was a sign of weakness. "Permission granted," he declared, "but keep all weapons locked on them." The human shuttle was a work of art. It moved with a silent, impossible grace, docking with the eternal dominion as if the laws of physics were merely polite suggestions. The man who stepped out was elderly, with kind eyes and gray hair. He was dressed in simple, unadorned robes, a stark contrast to the gilded uniforms of the imperial court. Flanked by 2 towering imperial guards, he was led to the throne room, where Emperor Thaxian sat surrounded by the spoils of 1,000 conquered worlds. "Your Imperial Majesty," the man said, offering a simple, respectful bow. "My name is Marcus Webb. I am an ambassador for the Terran Preserve, and I've come to ask for your help in preventing a great tragedy." "The only tragedy I see," the Emperor sneered, "is the one that will befall your people when you refuse to bow to my authority." Marcus Webb slowly looked around the vast throne room, his eyes lingering on the captured banners and trophies of war. "Your Majesty," he said at last, his voice soft but clear, "may I ask, how long has your galactic empire existed?" "For over 3,000 years, Thaxian boasted, "we have brought order to a chaotic galaxy." "And in all that time," Webb continued, "did you ever meet a species that chose to simply walk away from it all rather than be ruled by you?" The Emperor scowled. "No species was ever foolish enough to be given that option." "Precisely," Webb said. "Every race you met either bent the knee or was broken. But humanity, we saw a third path. We saw the path of endless war for dominance you were on, and we chose to step off it completely. We exiled ourselves. And now you crawl out of your hiding place to challenge us," Thaxian roared. "We have no desire for a fight, Your Majesty. All we ask is to continue our exile in peace, but if you force our hand, you need to understand exactly what that will unleash." Emperor Thaxian leaned forward on his throne. "Enlighten me." Webb gestured, and a holographic map flickered to life between them. It was filled with star charts, technical schematics, and battle simulations that made the Imperial advisors draw a sharp breath. "For 3 centuries, humanity has studied the art of war," Webb explained. "Not because we enjoy it, but because we always feared this day would come. We've dissected every conflict in galactic history, including your own campaigns. We've learned from your triumphs and your mistakes." "Impossible," one of the Imperial generals snapped. "Our military archives are sealed." "Nothing is truly sealed when you have 300 years to pick the lock," Webb replied softly. "We've slipped through your networks, memorized your tactics, and analyzed your technology. We know the alloys in your ship's hulls, the thought processes of your commanders, and the bureaucratic levers of your empire." The hologram shifted, displaying intricate blueprints of Imperial warships, highlighting structural weak points and tactical vulnerabilities. The Emperor's own advisors paled, recognizing their most classified designs. "This is espionage of the highest order," the Emperor snarled. "This is survival," Webb corrected. "We had to understand any potential enemy to defend ourselves. But Your Majesty, that knowledge was a two-way street. While we were learning about you, we were also learning about ourselves." "And what did you learn?" Webb's face was etched with a deep sadness. "We learned that humanity is very, very good at war. Maybe too good. In our exile, we've had the time to perfect the very skills we once used to nearly destroy ourselves. We've become something this galaxy has never seen before. And what is that? The Emperor demanded, though a part of him was already beginning to dread the answer. A species that has spent 3 centuries preparing for a single battle, Webb said. Every human born in our territory has been trained since birth to defend our home. Every ship we've built incorporates the lessons learned from studying millennia of galactic warfare. Every single weapon has been engineered specifically to counter the tactics employed by your Imperial forces. The hologram cycled through images of human training academies, vast orbital factories, and weapons testing grounds. The sheer scope was mind-boggling, an entire civilization optimized for military readiness. But it's more than that, Webb continued. We've learned to cooperate in ways other species can't comprehend. Humans in exile don't have internal rivalries. We are a unified whole. Every one of us is linked to every other through a quantum communication network. We think as one, we act as one, and we fight as one. Emperor Thaxian rose from his throne, his immense frame casting a shadow over the human ambassador. Is that a threat? I'm trying to save you, Your Majesty, Webb replied, his voice steady. And your empire, and my people. If this fight happens, it will be a cataclysm unlike anything the galaxy has ever witnessed. We do not want that. Then surrender. Webb shook his head with profound regret. We can't. Our exile is the only thing that keeps humanity from becoming the monster we fear we could be. A conquering plague spreading across the stars, consuming everything in its path. If we surrender to you, if we rejoin the galactic stage, that self-control will be lost. You speak as if you have a choice. Everyone has a choice, Your Majesty. You can recall your fleet and honor our isolation. Or you can attack us and face what comes next, but be very clear about this. If you attack, you won't just be fighting a few thousand human ships. You will be fighting the unified will of an entire species that has spent 3 centuries preparing for this exact moment. The Emperor glanced at his advisors, seeing the flicker of doubt in their eyes for the first time in his reign. They had seen the sensor readings and analyzed the strange human formations, recognizing technology that was light years ahead of their own. How do I know this isn't a bluff? Thaxian demanded. Webb tapped a small device on his wrist. Instantly, every view screen in the throne room was hijacked, now displaying live feeds from across the entire Imperial fleet. The humans had somehow hacked into every ship's communication grid simultaneously. Your Majesty, Webb said, as the screens showed the interiors of dozens of Imperial command decks. This is not a bluff. As we speak, we are inside your ship's computer cores. We are listening to your communications, tracking your fleet movements, and analyzing your weapon systems. If we chose to, we could disable your entire armada without firing a single shot. The Emperor's guards instinctively raised their weapons, but Webb held up his hands placatingly. We're not here to harm anyone, he said. We're here to give you a demonstration of our capabilities, so you'll understand why pressing this issue would be a tragedy for us all. Emperor Thaxian stared, mesmerized at the screens displaying his own mighty vessels being watched by an unseen enemy. His imperial pride was at war with the dawning, terrifying realization that these humans were unlike any foe he had ever encountered. What is your proposal? He finally asked. Withdraw your fleet, Webb said simply. Classify this entire encounter as top secret. Forget you ever found us. In exchange, we will continue our quiet exile and never meddle in galactic affairs again. And if I refuse? Webb's expression became infinitely sad. Then we will do what we've spent 300 years preparing for. We will defend our home with everything we have. And Your Majesty, after 3 centuries of practice, we have become exceedingly good at defense. The throne room was deathly quiet, the silence broken only by the low hum of the ship's life support. Outside, 10,000 Imperial warships hung in the black, awaiting their orders, while thousands of human vessels stood ready for the battle to come. Emperor Thaxian looked from the compromised view screens to the ambassador who spoke of peace and self-imposed exile to his advisors, who could no longer meet his gaze with their usual unwavering confidence. For the first time in his long and bloody reign, he faced an enemy that didn't want to fight and that scared him more than any declaration of war ever had. Emperor Thaxian glared at Ambassador Webb for a long, tense moment, his yellow eyes blazing with the fury of a ruler who had never been so thoroughly challenged. The only sounds in the throne room were the gentle thrum of the ship's systems and the strained breathing of his advisors. "No," he said at last, his voice booming against the metal walls. "The Galactic Empire does not retreat. We do not bargain with ghosts, and we most certainly do not yield to the demands of a species that should have stayed extinct." Webb's shoulders slumped just slightly, as if he had anticipated this outcome but had desperately hoped to be wrong. "Your Majesty, I beg you to reconsider. What comes next can never be taken back." "What comes next," the Emperor thundered, rising from his throne, "is that your people will learn the price of defying imperial might. Guards, escort this man back to his ship. Then prepare the fleet for an immediate assault." As Webb was led away, he touched his wrist device one last time. Across the entire Imperial Armada, every communication screen flickered for a moment, displaying the same 4 lines of text. Sanctuary protocol, terminated. Threat designation, extinction event. Authorization, full release. Admiral Zakar, watching from the bridge of his flagship, felt an icy dread crawl up his spine as he read the words. Around him, his crew went about their duties, filled with the easy confidence of soldiers who had never tasted defeat. But Zakar remembered the warden's warnings, the crippled patrol ship, and the ambassador's hauntingly certain sorrow. "Sir," Lieutenant Vex reported, "the Emperor is ordering all ships into attack formation. We are to begin bombardment of the nearest human installations." "Acknowledged," Zakar replied, though his heart felt like a lead weight in his chest. Across the void, the human response was instantaneous and perfectly coordinated. The scattered clusters of ships suddenly moved as one, like a flock of birds turning in perfect unison. Defensive platforms that had appeared inert suddenly flared to life, their energy signatures so massive they made Imperial sensors scream in alarm. "All ships," the Emperor's voice crackled across the fleet-wide channel. "Attack at will. Show these humans the consequences of defying the Empire." The first wave of Imperial ships, over 1,000 heavy cruisers, surged forward, unleashing a storm of destruction. Blinding energy beams and swarms of missiles lit up the darkness between the two fleets. It was a show of force that had shattered entire civilizations. But the human ships didn't react like any enemy they had ever faced. They didn't scatter or attempt to evade. Instead, they seemed to simply absorb the cataclysmic barrage, their hulls glowing for a brief moment before they fired the energy right back at the Imperial fleet with terrifying precision. "What in the stars?" Torres yelled from his sensor station, watching in disbelief as Imperial ships were crippled by their own reflected weapons fire. The counterattacks were surgically precise. Instead of obliterating the Imperial vessels, they targeted key systems, weapons arrays, engines, life support. Within minutes, hundreds of Imperial warships were left dead in space, their crews alive but their vessels utterly disabled. "Second wave, advance!" the Emperor commanded, his voice strained with disbelief. But the second wave fared no better. The human ships moved with an impossible grace, appearing to flicker in and out of normal space. They would materialize behind Imperial lines, strike with strange weapons that bypassed shields completely, and then vanish before a single shot could be fired in return. And then, The true nightmare began. Some of the disabled Imperial ships suddenly powered back up, but their transponders were no longer broadcasting Imperial codes. "Sir!" Torres shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "The disabled ships, they're targeting us. Their systems have been hijacked." Admiral Zakar could only watch in absolute horror as vessels bearing the Imperial crest turned their guns on their own brothers in arms. Even worse, he could hear the chatter from the compromised ships. The crews weren't being hurt. They were being forced to watch helplessly as their own vessels turned on their allies. "This can't be happening," one of his tactical officers whispered in disbelief. "How are they hijacking our own ships?" The answer flashed across every screen in the Imperial fleet. It was Ambassador Webb, the human diplomat, but his sad, pleading expression was gone, replaced by one of cold steel. "Imperial forces," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "You are now witnessing what humanity became during our long exile. We didn't just build better weapons or stronger ships. We learned how to turn your own technology against you." As he spoke, more Imperial ships suddenly went rogue, their systems completely compromised. But the takeovers were surgical. Weapons targeting human ships were disabled, while life support and comms were left untouched. "Every ship in your fleet," Webb continued, "is built on principles we left behind centuries ago. Your computers run on logic systems we invented. Your weapons are based on physics we mastered. Your communication networks use protocols we created. We didn't just study your tech, we built the very foundation it stands on." Emperor Thaxian's furious voice crackled over the fleet-wide channel. "All ships fall back to Formation 7. Prepare for a coordinated attack." But as the Imperial ships scrambled to regroup, they realized they couldn't. Their orders were being intercepted, twisted, and changed. Their navigation systems were feeding them lies, sending them into chaos. Ships that tried to lock onto human vessels found their weapon systems mysteriously failing. "This is cyber warfare on a level I've never imagined," Dr. Yulin breathed from her station. "They aren't just jamming us, they're rewriting our systems in real time." The human fleet, in stark contrast, moved like a perfectly choreographed dance, every ship knowing exactly where the others would be. Their attacks were calculated with chilling precision, designed to disable, not destroy, showcasing a tactical genius the Empire had never dreamed of. But the most unnerving thing wasn't their technology, it was their self-control. With every passing minute, it became terrifyingly clear that the humans could have wiped out the entire Imperial fleet in the first few moments of the battle. Instead, they were choosing to disarm ships, to capture rather than kill, to demonstrate their power rather than annihilate their enemy. "Sir," Lieutenant Vex reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "we're getting damage reports from across the fleet, but sir, there are no casualties. The humans aren't killing anyone." Admiral Czar just stared at the tactical map. More than half of his fleet was now either dead in space or under human control, yet every single crew member was alive. The humans were fighting a war to win without taking a single life. "What kind of enemy fights like this?" he murmured to himself. The answer came from a voice he never expected to hear. The warden appeared on his private screen, her face grim but not hostile. "The kind of enemy that never wanted to be your enemy," she said plainly. "Admiral, your emperor rejected our final offer for peace. Now we have to show him why that was a mistake, but we won't become murderers just to prove a point." Around them, the one-sided battle raged on. The mighty Imperial fleet was being taken apart, piece by piece, by an enemy that seemed to know their every move before they even made it. Ships were caught in invisible tractor beams, hit by weapons they couldn't track, and controlled by systems they couldn't comprehend. "How?" Czar asked, his voice raw. "How are you doing all of this?" 300 years of preparation, the warden answered. 300 years with every human mind focused on one single goal, defending our home. We studied every angle of warfare, every possible strategy, every enemy we could imagine. We became something the galaxy has never seen before, a species that treats war like a science to be perfected. On the main view screen, Emperor Thaxian's flagship was now completely surrounded by human ships. But they weren't firing. They were just waiting. The message couldn't be clearer. The Emperor's life was in their hands, and they were choosing to let him live. Your Emperor has a choice, the warden went on. He can continue this hopeless fight and watch his entire fleet be captured without firing a single effective shot, or he can finally accept that some things are more important than imperial pride. As if on cue, Ambassador Webb appeared again on the fleet-wide comms, but this time he was standing on the bridge of the Emperor's own flagship. Your Majesty, Webb said, speaking directly to a stunned Thaxian, your ship's defenses have been bypassed, your crew is perfectly safe, and your personal guards are currently wondering why their weapons have stopped working. I'm standing on your bridge to prove a point. We could have ended your life at any moment during this battle. We chose not to. The Emperor, now surrounded by human soldiers who had seemingly appeared from thin air on his most secure vessel, suddenly looked very old and very tired. What do you want? He asked. The same thing we've always wanted, Webb replied. To be left in peace. Your Majesty, in the last hour, you've seen what 3 centuries of human progress can do. But this was just a demonstration. We were holding back because we value life. All life. You've humiliated the greatest fleet in galactic history, Thaxian spat bitterly. We've shown you why we needed to be left alone, Webb corrected gently. Humanity didn't go into exile because we were weak. We went into exile because we were too strong. What you witness today is what happens when we're forced to defend ourselves. Just imagine what we could become if we ever decided to expand into the galaxy again. The Emperor looked around his bridge at the silent human soldiers. They held weapons he didn't recognize, wore armor that seemed to shimmer and bend light, and moved with the eerie precision of a single organism. You're not like the other species, he said, his voice barely a whisper. No, Your Majesty, we're not. We're the species that chose to chain our own power rather than abuse it. But that choice only holds if others respect our isolation. All across the Imperial fleet, disabled ships were suddenly having their systems returned, fully restored, but with their weapons permanently offline. Human medical ships were already moving among the crippled vessels, offering aid to anyone who needed it. What happens now? Emperor Thaxian asked. Webb gave him a sad smile. Now, you go home. You classify this entire incident as top secret. You add your own warnings to our beacon network. You tell the rest of the galaxy that this region of space is protected by automated defenses that are too dangerous to challenge. And you forget you ever found us. And if I refuse? Then we'll have to find a more permanent solution to the problem of imperial expansion, Webb said, his voice still gentle, but with an unmistakable edge. Your Majesty, you've seen what we can do when we hold back. Please don't force us to show you what we can do when we don't. The Emperor was silent for a long, heavy moment, surrounded by the enemy that had defeated him without killing a single soul. Finally, he gave a slow, stiff nod. Very well, but this isn't over. Yes, Your Majesty, Webb said softly. It is. Because now you know what we truly are. And you know why the galaxy is safer with us right where we are. Hours later, the remnants of the Imperial fleet limped away from Terran space, their pride shattered but their lives spared. Behind them, the human ships melted back into the blackness, becoming invisible once more. Admiral Zector, standing on his bridge and watching the ancient warning beacons flare back to life, finally understood. They weren't threats. They were a shield. They were protecting the galaxy from a species that had become too powerful to be free. The beacons resumed their silent, eternal broadcast. But now they were joined by new signals, broadcast on all Imperial frequencies. Forbidden Terran quarantine zone. Enter at your own risk. Some doors are best left unopened. In the years that followed, the galaxy began to change. The quiet knowledge that humanity was watching from the shadows cooled the tempers of warring species. Conflicts became rarer, and negotiations became the new norm. The great powers learned to talk out their problems, knowing that somewhere in the dark, patient guardians were waiting, ready to step in if civilization ever threatened to burn itself down. And in Terran space, humanity returned to its self-imposed exile, forever watching, forever ready, and forever hoping that the rest of the galaxy would learn to be better than they themselves had once been. The quarantine held, and the galaxy was safer for it.